Travelers of lonely roads, explorers of the great outdoors, workers of creepy jobs and late night shift, what's your scary story? I was the navigation officer for a research ship in the South Pacific. We had recently come to Papua New Guinea for some work along the coast. We had arrived in a small bay at around 10 p.m. in the dark and dropped the anchor. I went over to mark our position on the chart and noticed an annotation that said native village reported in the area. There were no fires or lights on the coast, so I didn't think anything much more of it. I turned on all the deck and underwater lights and went back into the bridge to stand my night watch as everyone else went to bed. With all the lights on, I couldn't see further than about 25 yards because of a light mist in the pitch black night. I sat in the bridge with the door open because I liked the sound of the night and the feeling of the air in the tropics. I kept hearing light splashing in the water and went out to see because often we get hundreds of fish in our underwater lights. There was nothing there. I went back inside but kept hearing faint splashing and couldn't figure out where it was coming from. Since I couldn't see into the distance, I went into the chart room and flicked on our infrared camera system, and there they all were. About 50 native outrigger canoes just sitting outside our pool of light. About 3 people to a canoe and all just sitting and watching us. Occasionally paddling one way or the other to keep their station. I have never felt so suddenly and violently alone and small as I did on that ship in the dark. I got a deckhand up and we both just walked around the decks to show that people were awake and moving. They sat there and watched us all night. Completely invisible except for on the infrared cameras. In the morning they came in and traded with us and were very friendly and just hadn't had a ship in their bay for decades. I was driving down an old highway, not heavy usage anymore, during a snowstorm in 2011. Had a pretty close call on this particular trip. I was heading to the next town over with my girlfriend at the time, and we behind an SUV on the road. We were behind them for a good while, when they came to a stop. I maneuvered the car around to get a good look at why they stopped. There was a truck in the road, driver and passenger doors open, and 2 sets of tracks in the snow leading off to the woods. I got out of the car to make sure no one was injured or needed help, but there were no signs of car trouble. There wasn't much snow built up on the inside of the car, so the doors hadn't been left open for long. It was snowing pretty heavy. I started to follow the set of tracks into the woods to check, but stopped. Before I could do much of anything else, the driver of the SUV called me over and let me know that the truck had been reported as stolen. They said highway patrol was on their way, so I went about my business. A day or so later I found out the owner of the truck was a man who lived nearby that had been missing for over a week. The police went into the woods to look for him, and found his freshly deceased body in a ditch with a single gunshot to the back of the head. Whoever took him beforehand must have marched him out there, executed him, and just wandered off into the woods. I'm still very glad I didn't follow those tracks. I didn't hear the shot, so it must have been right before we all arrived at the truck. I don't even want to think what would have happened to me if I'd persisted. Once I was working in a restaurant and got done at around 12ish. I always rode my bicycle to and from work. It was about 15 minutes along a bike trail next to the train tracks. This trail was constantly straight but had quite a few exits here and there. It also only had a few small parts of it lit up by street lights, so without my front bicycle light I would be totally blind for the most part. So this one night I leave home after the shift and I notice a guy is biking behind me, which isn't too weird at that time of night in a busy, but very safe, city. It was weird that he had no lights and was still there after the first main exits, which after that led to a small town, but I thought it might just be a coincidence. I felt a bit creeped out and thought I might just be tired and the dark of the night is getting to me. So I decided to bike a bit slower and let this person pass. There was definitely enough room on this trail. The person started drifting along at the same speed as me and made no attempt to pass or even come closer. This is about when I'm a few minutes away from home and decide to take some random lefts and rights instead of going straight home, just in case this person was following me and wouldn't find out where I live. I bike around going in random twists and turns in a suburban neighborhood and he's still behind me. What I then did, as I noticed I was heading straight for a long small dark path only for bicycles, I decided to turn into one of the houses and hide in the dark shadows from their garage. I heard this person pass the house and brake quickly in that small path. At this moment my blood is boiling. Now I hop on my bike, and when I passed the edge of that street I stopped and stared that person in the eyes. Well, that's what I hope he thought, cause I actually couldn't see anything of his face. I biked so fast, then did another few extra loops here and there until I felt safe and alone again to go home. Never had anything like it afterwards, and still don't know who or why it could have been. I'm happy not knowing. I worked at a movie theater and most often worked the closing shift. One night me and another manager were sitting in the small office. She was working on the nightly deposit and I was finishing up inventory numbers. We had a CD player that we would listen to at night with a stack of CDs sitting next to it. I stood up and changed the CD and sat back down. About a minute after, the entire stack of CDs launched itself across the room. One of the CDs hit my coworker in the back of the head. She looked around and saw me sitting there dumbfounded with the CDs scattered all around me and the office. We quickly finished up and left. A couple of days later, one of the other day shift managers calls me and asks me what we were doing the prior night. She seemed really annoyed, which was out of character for her because we were friends. I asked her what she meant and she asked me why we had dumped all of the security tapes onto the floor and left them there. I told her we hadn't touched the security tapes at all. The tapes were stored on top of the CCTV monitor on a small VHS tape shelf. The shelf hadn't been moved and only the tapes were on the floor. She also said that all of the sleeves from the tapes had been removed and thrown all over the place too. I used to have a buddy that lived in the same neighborhood, a few streets over. One night we were having a couple of beers in his backyard while playing cards. I had some things to do the next morning, so just before 10 I said my goodbyes and shoved off. It was a short walk, maybe 15 minutes door to door, so I never drove. Anyway, it was a nice night, uneventful trip. But when I got home, my roommate was coming out the front door, coffee in hand, and dressed for work. He gave me a funny look and said he thought I was asleep since my truck was in the driveway. I told him where I'd been and asked why he was going into work at night. That's when he kind of laughed and asked if I was drunk. We stared at each other for a minute and then he told me it was just after 5 in the morning and he was going in just like he usually did. In my entire life, I'd never felt more confused than I did in that moment. I could tell he was dead serious, but I knew I had just left my friend's house. I checked my phone and sure enough, 5-something in the AM. My roommate left for work. I paced circles in the living room for a bit, then called the friend whose house I'd just left. He groggily answered and confirmed I'd left at 10 the previous evening. I have no idea what happened during those 7 hours of my life, and it gives me chills to think about it all these years later. I wasn't drunk, I wasn't tired, no one could have slipped anything in either of the 2 Coors Lights I'd had, no known medical conditions that would have caused me to black out, and nothing has happened like it since. I just don't know what happened to that time. I came back into my camp from cooking/cleaning/taking a dump, and found an individual digging around in my tent and gear. I quietly watched the person from a bit away while they rummaged around, eventually leaving while taking nothing. Packed up all my shit and hiked through in the dark. There's zero good things that could come from someone else looking through your gear in the middle of the woods as nighttime approaches. Don't know what they wanted, don't want to find out. I'm a little late to the party, but this one filled my nightmares for a long time after it happened. A couple years ago, I was living in Colombo, Sri Lanka at a small hostel on the outskirts of the city. The hostel catered to long-term guests, so I got to know everyone pretty well who lived there. There was a guy living with us, his name was Raj, and Raj was a middleman of sorts in the casinos. In Sri Lanka, the casinos are incredibly shady places full of Russian mobsters and other low-life criminals from China and India. The casinos are technically illegal, but they continue operation through bribery and government coercion. I went to one of them one time and it was a surreal experience. Anyway, my friend Raj's job was to take online bets from Indian clients and make them physically in the casino. He was playing with their money and was simply the vessel to allow individuals to play from another location. He played in some high-stakes games and with a lot of money for some powerful people. Basically a recipe for disaster. One night, he fucked up, big time. One of his clients managed to gain access to his online system and stole all of the money his clients had deposited to play with, a sum well over $50,000 US, which is a fortune in Sri Lanka. We only found out about the theft after Raj's disappearance. A note was left in his bed, very cryptic, saying "Don't look for me and I'm leaving" among other things. Dude vanished overnight. We made a police report and waited to hear anything. After a few days, the police come back to visit, asking someone who knew Raj to join them. The locals in the hostel were afraid to go with the police, so I volunteered and was taken to their headquarters. They took me to the back where I was shown photos of a body, cut into pieces. It was Raj. He'd been cut apart and dumped into the sewer canal nearby by someone. They'd brought me there to identify the body. They never found who did it either, and the image of those photos had never really left me. I'll forever be haunted by it, and I left the hostel shortly afterwards. Poor guy was caught up in some shady stuff, but he didn't deserve that. Not exactly a lonely road, but I was speeding west on I-70 through Colorado near Glenwood Canyon when I decided to slow down and enjoy the view. I notice a state patrol car in front of me a minute later when he turns on his sirens, and I think he's got me busted for speeding. Instead, he's pulling to the shoulder up ahead to help a broken down motorist. I slow down and remember looking at the motorist who is sitting in the driver's seat with their head down, thinking, man, that guy is lucky to get help out here, no cell coverage, etc. I keep driving west. A few minutes later I start to notice police cars flying past me headed back east, sirens blaring, going extremely fast through a curvy canyon. One after another for like 15 minutes, ambulances, fire trucks, seems like all emergency response in the country is headed back the direction I came from. The next day I'm at a hotel in Utah and discover what happened. Turns out the broken down motorist had skipped bail, and after being confronted by the state trooper who was there to offer assistance, exited his car and began shooting the officer in his back multiple times. On a normal day, the officer would have died as they typically drive alone, but on that day he was headed to training and had a partner in the car who empties his clip and killed the motorist. Officer almost bled out on the road but survived. I don't really know if it qualifies as scary, but I remember getting hit from behind by something while I was stopped in the middle of an intersection in the middle of the night last year. To this day, I don't really know what it was. I even saw the traffic cam footage and saw nothing. All I saw was me being stopped completely in the middle of the road waiting for a car in front of me to pass by so I can cross when my car shook like something had hit it from behind, and a minute or so later, it showed me parking to the side to check what had happened. The accident didn't leave any dents nor scratches, but it had enough impact to disalign my bumper. I've actively tried to avoid that road since. I was camping in my car while on a drive up to see my family in Salt Lake. I was taking my time on what should have been about an 11-hour car drive with minimal stops. But this time I was on my own, so I was stopping to take in views and all that. Think I was about 18 and not much money to my name, so instead of getting a pricey room for the night I decided I'd just find a secluded place off the freeway in the desert. For anyone that's ever driven the route, it was about an hour past the racetrack just outside of Las Vegas. It was one of those exits where there were just farm roads coming off it. So I assume I wasn't gonna be on anyone's land that would mind too much or ever check on me. I pulled off and parked up, was sat on my tailgate enjoying my dinner of beef jerky and Arizona tea while listening to music. Just normal stuff. Out of nowhere, a fucking motorcycle flies past me. No lights, no nothing. It was going fast enough that it took me a solid 20 seconds to put it all together. Laughed and shook my head just thinking how dumb it was, but it's their life, do what they want. Not a minute later, two low-flying jets fly overhead. Top Gun style, curving mountains and battling valleys. It was a great show. Then 10 minutes later or so, a convoy comes rolling down the road. I could hear it before I saw the lights. Now, I grew up in the military, so I'm used to seeing this shit. But this felt different. Maybe it was just the series of events. Normally you see a convoy, you wave at them and let them go by. But it was nearly midnight and something told me to just turn around and pretend I didn't see anything. A Humvee pulls up and basically blocks me from moving. My vehicle could hear doors open, but no one gets out to come to me. I was leaning on my hood at this point. The car was off, all that, didn't even turn to look at them. Keep my hands away from me and on the hood. I could feel them just looking at me. Convoy passes, Humvee pulls out and goes on their way. I really think it was just the series of events. The jets were probably doing practice since the AFB is right next to LV. The motorcycle was just some dude taking advantage of empty roads, and the convoy was just out for some training like the jets. When I was 18, my family and I took a vacation to Hawaii. My mother wanted to do the touristy thing and do the road to Hana. Normally you can take a tour bus up it, but that wasn't good enough for her. So we rented a car. The rental companies typically forbid driving that road because of the liability issues. That didn't stop my mother. We had a normal drive up there, plenty to see. We spent all day exploring. So by the time everyone was exhausted, it was night. Now, we were a good ways away from the road down, think back dirt roads of Maui. So what do? Go down some of the closed-off local roads. This one road, in particular, was a very narrow winding road over the edge of the island. You couldn't even stop on the road to get out and pee. If you looked over the edge, it was a straight drop into the ocean. Anyhow, so we were driving in the dead of the night, slowly, and we approached this weird bend that backs up to a heavily forested area, a small waterfall, and a cliff overhang just above us. My mother wanted to take some pictures of the moon, stars, ocean because it was breathtaking with no city lights. So we pull off to the side of this road, with just enough space to let another car pass you. I, of course, get out too. It was dead silent. Then all of a sudden I hear what sounds like a crying baby. Which was weird. We were in the middle of nowhere and hadn't seen anyone for hours. So, I'm just standing there, confused, and it stops. I motion for my mother to come over and ask if she heard anything. She didn't. So we stand there for a little longer and it starts up again. Neither of us could pinpoint where it was coming from. Both of us were panicked because that's what baby crying does to most humans. We spent a good hour calling out and trying to figure out what to do. Eventually it stopped. We returned back to the hotel and never heard anything about it.